I noticed the bitter taste in my drink, so I pretended to sip and slid it to her mother. Instead, Chapter 1. The Perfect Girlfriend. Duration, 18 to 20 minutes. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of the upscale restaurant in downtown Seattle as I adjusted my tie for the third time. The Space Needle gleamed through the grey October evening, its lights cutting through the mist like a beacon. I was nervous, more nervous than I'd been in years. Tonight was the night I was finally going to meet Sarah's family. Sarah Mitchell had been the perfect girlfriend for 8 months. We'd met at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill, where she worked as a barista while finishing her psychology degree at the University of Washington. Everything about her seemed genuine. Her laugh when I told terrible jokes, the way she'd scrunch her nose when concentrating on her studies, how she'd hold my hand during our walks through Pike Place Market. She was beautiful in an understated way, with auburn hair that caught the light and green eyes that seemed to see right through you. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos, and tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. You're going to love my mum, Sarah had said just that morning as we lay in bed in my Belltown apartment. Sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting warm rectangles across the hardwood floors. She's been dying to meet you ever since I told her about us. What exactly did you tell her? I asked, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Just that you're this amazing software engineer who makes me laugh and treats me like a queen. She turned to face me, her fingers playing with my chest hair. Oh, and that you're loaded. She laughed, but something in her eyes flickered. Just for a moment. I should have paid attention to that flicker. My name is David Chen, and at 32, I'd worked my way up from a struggling immigrant kid in San Francisco's Chinatown to a senior software architect at one of Seattle's biggest tech companies. The money was good, really good. My penthouse apartment, the Tesla in the parking garage, the investment portfolio that my financial advisor kept saying was impressive for someone your age. It all represented years of 18-hour days, weekend coding sessions, and sacrifice. But success had come with a price. Relationships had always been difficult. The tech world was demanding, and I'd watched too many promising relationships crumble under the pressure of my schedule. When I met Sarah, though, everything felt different. She understood when I had to work late. She didn't complain about the business trips. She even seemed genuinely interested when I talked about my projects. My mum's making her famous pot roast, Sarah continued, snuggling closer. And don't worry about my stepdad, Frank. He seems gruff, but he's a teddy bear once you get to know him. He owns a construction company, Mitchell & Sons. Maybe you've seen their trucks around town? I had seen them. Big blue trucks with bold lettering, usually at high-end residential developments around Bellevue and Redmond. Sounds like success runs in the family, I said. Mom always says she married up twice. First with my biological father. He was a lawyer, and then with Frank after Dad died when I was 12. Sarah's voice grew quieter. Frank's been more of a father to me than my real dad ever was. The restaurant Sarah had chosen was Canlis, one of Seattle's most exclusive establishments. It sat perched on a hill overlooking Lake Union, its mid-century modern architecture a testament to refined taste and serious money. The kind of place where reservations were made months in advance and dinner for 4 could easily run $800. When I'd offered to take everyone out, Sarah had insisted on this place. It's Mom's favorite, she'd explained. She's always wanted to eat there but never could afford it. This would mean the world to her. How could I say no to that? I arrived 15 minutes early, my palms slightly damp despite the cool October air. The maitre d' led me to a table with a perfect view of the lake, where the city lights reflected like scattered diamonds on the dark water. I ordered a scotch, Macallan 18, because tonight felt like a night for the good stuff, and tried to calm my nerves. They arrived together, and I stood to greet them. Sarah looked stunning in a black dress I'd never seen before, her hair pulled back in an elegant chignon. But it was her mother who commanded attention. Linda Mitchell was a striking woman in her early 50s, with the same auburn hair as her daughter and sharp blue eyes that seemed to appraise everything they saw. She carried herself with confidence, her designer handbag and shoes clearly expensive. Frank was exactly as Sarah had described, tall, broad-shouldered, with calloused hands that spoke of years in construction, but dressed in a well-tailored suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. "You must be David," Linda said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. Her smile was warm, but those blue eyes were calculating. "Sarah's told us so much about you." "All good things, I hope," I replied, shaking Frank's firm grip. "Only the best," Frank rumbled, his voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who'd spent years shouting over construction noise. "Though she might have undersold that view you've got up there in Belltown. Stopped by your building once. Impressive place." A small chill ran down my spine. Sarah had never mentioned bringing her family by my apartment building. When had they been there, and why? "The Pacific Northwest has been good to me," I said carefully, helping Linda into her seat. The evening began pleasantly enough. Linda regaled us with stories about Sarah's childhood, while Frank talked about his business and the challenges of managing construction crews. Sarah sat beside me, her hand occasionally finding mine under the table, squeezing gently whenever the conversation turned to potentially awkward territory. "David, Sarah tells us you've done very well in tech," Linda said as our appetizers arrived. "Software, right?" "I'm a senior architect at Cloud Scale Solutions," I confirmed. "We handle enterprise cloud infrastructure for major corporations." "That must be quite lucrative," Linda continued, cutting into her seared scallops with precision. "The tech boom has certainly created a lot of opportunities for the right people." There was something in her tone that made me uncomfortable, but Sarah jumped in smoothly. "Mum's always been fascinated by technology. She was one of the first people in her neighborhood to get a computer. Different times," Frank added. "These days, seems like everyone's trying to strike it rich in tech. Most folks don't have the brains for it, though." He raised his wine glass, a Bordeaux that cost more per bottle than some people made in a day. To those who do, we drank, and I found myself studying their faces in the candlelight. There was something choreographed about their responses, like actors who'd rehearsed their lines. But maybe I was just overthinking things. Meeting the parents was always awkward. The main courses arrived: my Pacific Northwest salmon, Sarah's rack of lamb, Linda's duck confit, and Frank's dry-aged steak. The conversation flowed more easily as the wine loosened everyone up. Linda shared embarrassing stories about Sarah's teenage years, while Frank told increasingly elaborate tales about difficult clients and problematic construction projects. "Remember that house in Mercer Island?" Linda asked Frank, laughing. "The client who wanted to move his master bedroom 3 times during construction? Cost him an extra $100,000, Frank chuckled. "But the customer's always right, even when they're dead wrong." "That's the construction business," Sarah added. "Dad always says you have to be flexible." I noticed she called Frank Dad without hesitation, and the genuine affection in her voice when she spoke about him. Whatever else was going on, her love for her stepfather seemed real. As dessert approached, Linda excused herself to the restroom, and Frank stepped outside for what he called a quick smoke. This left Sarah and me alone at the table, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows. "They love you," Sarah whispered, leaning close. Her perfume was intoxicating, something expensive and floral that I'd bought her for our 6-month anniversary. "I can tell." "They seem great," I replied, though something nagged at me. "Your mom's very observant. She's protective. After my dad died, she had to be strong for both of us. She's got good instincts about people." Sarah's hand found mine again. "She told me in the bathroom that she thinks you're perfect for me." Before I could respond, Linda and Frank returned to the table. The server appeared with dessert menus and offered after-dinner drinks. "I'd love a digestive," Linda said, "something smooth. What do you recommend?" The server launched into a detailed description of their aged cognac selection, but I found myself distracted by a conversation at the next table. A couple was arguing in hushed tones about money, something about investments gone wrong and loans coming due. The woman was crying softly, while the man kept insisting everything would work out. "David," Sarah's voice brought me back to our table. "They're asking about drinks." "Sorry, I was just The cognac sounds perfect. Make it 4. As the server departed, Linda leaned forward with interest. You seemed deep in thought there for a moment. Just thinking about how lucky we are, I said, gesturing toward the window. This city, this life. Sometimes I hear people struggling and remember that not everyone gets these opportunities. That's very thoughtful, Linda replied, and for the first time that evening, her smile seemed genuinely warm. Sarah chose well. The cognac arrived in beautiful crystal snifters, the amber liquid catching the restaurant's soft lighting. Frank raised his glass first. To family, he said, and to new beginnings. We all lifted our glasses, but as I brought mine to my lips, I caught something. Just a whiff at first, then stronger. Underneath the cognac's rich, woody aroma was something else. Something bitter and medicinal that shouldn't have been there. My hand froze halfway to my mouth. The bitter scent was unmistakable. I'd smelled it before during a college chemistry class. It was the smell of dissolved pills, something that definitely didn't belong in expensive French cognac. I glanced. Around the table, Linda was watching me intently, her glass already halfway to her lips. Frank had set his down and was wiping his mouth with his napkin. Sarah was smiling at me expectantly, her own glass ready to drink. My mind raced. Had someone at the restaurant made a mistake? But that was impossible. You don't accidentally add pharmaceutical compounds to cognac. This was intentional. But who would want to drug me, and why? The answer hit me like a physical blow. I looked at Sarah, beautiful, perfect Sarah, who knew about my money, my apartment, my schedule, my life. Sarah, who had brought me to this expensive restaurant to meet her family. Sarah, whose mother had been asking pointed questions about my finances all evening. I pretended to take a sip, letting the liquid just touch my lips before lowering the glass. The bitter taste was even stronger now, confirming my suspicions. My heart hammered in my chest, but I forced my expression to remain casual. This is incredible, I said, setting the glass down. Frank, you should try yours. But Frank was already shaking his head. Actually, I should probably stick to wine. Got an early morning tomorrow, and cognac always gives me a headache. Of course it does, I thought, because you know what's in it. Linda was still holding her glass, watching me carefully. Aren't you going to finish yours, David? It's quite expensive. I'm savoring it, I replied, then had an inspiration. The bitter taste was so strong that anyone who actually drank it would notice immediately, which meant none of them planned to drink theirs. They were all just waiting for me to consume mine. I picked up my glass again, swirled the cognac like a connoisseur, and pretended to take another small sip. Then, in a gesture that I hoped appeared natural and generous, I slid the glass across the table toward Linda. You know what? This is so good, I want you to have it. My treat. Consider it a thank you for raising such an amazing daughter. The color drained from Linda's face. For just a moment, the mask slipped completely, and I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes. But she recovered quickly, forcing a smile. That's very sweet, David, but I couldn't. I insist, I said firmly, pushing the glass closer to her. Please, it would mean a lot to me. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Sarah was looking back and forth between her mother and me, confusion evident on her face. Frank had gone completely still, his eyes fixed on the cognac glass sitting in front of Linda. What's wrong? Sarah asked, her voice small. Mom, why aren't you drinking it? Linda stared at the glass like it was a coiled snake. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled slightly as she reached for it, then stopped. I just remembered I'm on medication that doesn't mix well with alcohol, she said, the lie obvious in her voice. What medication? Sarah asked, genuine concern replacing confusion. You never mentioned being sick. The web was unraveling, and we all knew it. Frank cleared his throat and started to stand, but I was faster. Waiter! I called out loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. Excuse me, waiter! Our server hurried over, professional concern on his face. Is everything all right, sir? I'm afraid there might be something wrong with this cognac, I said, indicating Linda's glass. It has an unusual smell. Could you please have someone check it? Now Linda did stand, her chair scraping against the floor. "That won't be necessary. We should probably go anyway." "No," I said firmly, also rising. "I think we should definitely have it checked, just to be safe." I looked directly at Sarah, who was staring at her mother with growing horror. After all, we wouldn't want anyone to get sick. The server looked uncertainly between us. "Of course, sir. I'll get the manager right away." As he hurried off, Linda grabbed her purse and coat. "This is ridiculous. Frank, we're leaving." But Frank was looking at Sarah, who had tears streaming down her face. "Sarah, honey, you tried to drug him," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "My own mother tried to drug my boyfriend." "It's not what you think," Linda started. "Then drink it," I interrupted, gesturing to the glass. "If there's nothing wrong with it, drink the cognac." Linda's composure finally cracked completely. "You don't understand. We're in debt, serious debt. Frank's business is failing and we owe people who don't accept late payments. You needed to rob me," I finished. "Drug me, take me somewhere. What? Clean out my bank accounts? Hold me for ransom?" "It wasn't supposed to hurt you," Frank said quietly, his voice heavy with shame. "Just make you sleep while we figured out how to get what we needed." Sarah was sobbing now, her hands covering her face. "How could you do this to me? I loved him." The manager appeared with security, drawn by the commotion. Other diners were staring now, the restaurant's refined atmosphere shattered by our family drama. "I'm afraid I need to ask you all to come with me," the manager said diplomatically. "We can discuss this in private." As security escorted us toward the restaurant's back office, I caught a glimpse of the city through the windows. The Space Needle still gleamed against the dark sky, but everything else had changed. The perfect girlfriend, the loving family, the promising future, all of it was an elaborate lie designed to separate me from my money. But as I watched Sarah's shoulders shake with grief and betrayal, I realized that her tears might be the only real thing about this entire evening. She hadn't known. The shock and horror on her face when she understood what her family had planned, that was genuine, which meant that in trying to save myself, I might have destroyed the one person in this whole mess who was actually innocent. The bitter taste of the cognac still lingered on my lips as we were led away from the dining room, but it was nothing compared to the bitter taste of betrayal that was just beginning to settle in my throat. This was only the beginning. The Seattle Police Department's West Precinct building squatted like a concrete fortress against the drizzle that had started falling during our ride from the restaurant. It was past midnight now, and the city had taken on that particular Pacific Northwest melancholy that comes with late autumn rain and harsh truths revealed under fluorescent lights. I sat in Detective Maria Santos's office, nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since the Clinton administration. The cognac sample from Canlis was already on its way to the lab, but Detective Santos had assured me that field tests confirmed the presence of benzodiazepines, specifically a cocktail of Rohypnol and Valium that would have left me unconscious for hours. "Lucky you noticed the smell," Detective Santos said, settling into her chair across from me. She was a compact woman in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of tired eyes that suggested she'd seen too much human ugliness. Most people wouldn't have caught it, especially with cognac's strong aroma masking it. "I took chemistry in college," I replied, though that wasn't entirely true. The real reason I'd recognized the smell was darker. My father had struggled with prescription drug addiction before his death, and I'd learned to identify the bitter scent of dissolved pills the hard way. Through the one-way glass window in the door, I could see Sarah in the hallway still crying. She'd been crying for 3 hours now, ever since the truth came out at the restaurant. Frank and Linda were in separate interview rooms, presumably explaining their debt situation to other detectives. "Tell me about your relationship with Sarah Mitchell," Detective Santos said, opening a notepad. "How long have you been together?" 8 months. We met at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. The words felt strange in my mouth now, like describing a movie I'd seen rather than my own life. She was working there while finishing her psychology degree at UW. And you never suspected anything unusual about her or her family? I thought about it carefully. There had been small things. The way she'd sometimes ask detailed questions about my work and finances, how she'd seemed to know more about my building than I'd expected, the occasional flicker in her eyes when certain topics came up. Nothing concrete, I admitted. Though tonight, Frank mentioned he'd been by my apartment building before. Sarah had never told me she'd brought her family there. Detective Santos made a note. We've been looking into the Mitchell family's finances. Frank's construction company is indeed in serious trouble. They owe approximately $200,000 to various creditors, including some unsavory individuals. Loan sharks, among others, the kind of people who don't send polite collection notices. She flipped a page in her notepad. Linda Mitchell also has gambling debts totaling another $50,000. Online poker, sports betting, casino, loans. The picture was becoming clearer and I didn't like where it was headed. So they targeted me specifically. That's what we're trying to determine. Sarah's involvement is complicated. Detective Santos stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked streets. She claims she had no knowledge of her parents' plan, and her reaction tonight supports that. But there are some troubling patterns we need to discuss. She returned to her desk and opened a file folder. Inside were photographs, surveillance images from various locations around the city. My apartment building, my office, the gym I frequented, even the grocery store I used. These were taken over the past 6 months, Detective Santos explained. We found them on Frank Mitchell's computer, along with detailed notes about your routines, your income, your assets. My blood ran cold. They were stalking me. The question is whether Sarah was part of the surveillance or just the bait to get close to you. She pulled out another photo. This one showed Sarah and me having lunch at a cafe in Fremont about 3 months ago. In the background, barely visible, was Frank's distinctive blue construction truck. She was feeding them information, I said, the realization hitting like a physical blow. Maybe, or maybe they were following her dates without her knowledge, looking for suitable targets. The Detective Santos closed the folder. Either way, you were being watched and studied for months before tonight's attempt. A knock at the door interrupted us. A younger detective poked his head in. Santos, the daughter wants to talk to Mr. Chen. Should I? Give us a minute, Detective Santos said. When the door closed, she turned back to me. You don't have to talk to her if you don't want to, but she's been asking to see you since we got here. I stared at the one-way glass. Though I couldn't see Sarah from this angle, part of me wanted nothing more to do with any of the Mitchells ever again. But another part, the part that remembered her genuine shock and horror when she realized what her family had planned, needed to know the truth about her involvement. 5 minutes, I said. Detective Santos nodded and stepped out. A moment later, Sarah entered, her eyes red and puffy, her elegant dress from dinner now wrinkled and tear-stained. She sat in the chair across from me but couldn't seem to meet my eyes. David, Her voice cracked. I'm so sorry. I had no idea what they were planning. You have to believe me. I studied her face, looking for tells, for signs of deception. But all I saw was genuine anguish. The surveillance photos, Sarah. They have pictures of us together, notes about my schedule, my finances. How did they know so much about me if you weren't telling them? She wiped her nose with a tissue, leaving black streaks of mascara on the white paper. I did tell them about you, about your job, your apartment, how successful you were, but I thought I was just sharing, the way someone talks about the person they're dating. For 6 months, they kept asking questions, Mom especially. She said she was just concerned about me, wanted to make sure you were treating me well, that you were stable and successful. Sarah finally looked at me directly. I thought it was normal, the protective mother thing. What about Frank being at my building? He said he was curious about where you lived, that he drove by once when he was working in the neighborhood. Her voice was getting smaller. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. I leaned back in my chair, processing this. It was possible. just possible that Sarah had been manipulated as much as I had, used by her own family as an unwitting accomplice in their scheme. The questions they asked at dinner, I continued, about my income, my assets, that felt rehearsed, because it was. Sarah's admission hung between us like a confession. They coached me on what to ask, what to say. They told me it was so they could feel confident about your intentions. Make sure you weren't just using me, but you were using me. No, the word came out sharp and desperate. David, whatever else you believe, please know that my feelings for you are real. I fell in love with you. That was never part of any plan. I wanted to believe her. God help me, even after everything I wanted to believe her, but trust, once shattered, doesn't reassemble easily. The restaurant tonight, Canless, that was your choice. Sarah nodded miserably. Mum said she'd always wanted to eat there, that it would be perfect for meeting you. I thought I was doing something nice for her. And the timing? Why tonight specifically? Frank's creditors have been calling more frequently. Mum's been stressed, crying sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking. They said they needed to know if you were serious about me, about our future. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. I thought they meant marriage. The pieces fit together with sickening clarity. The Mitchell family's debts had reached a crisis point, and they'd accelerated their timeline. Sarah, believing she was helping her, parents evaluate her boyfriend's suitability as a future son-in-law, had unknowingly provided the intelligence for what was supposed to be my kidnapping. Detective Santos knocked and entered without waiting for a response. I'm sorry, but we need to wrap this up. Sarah, your parents want to see you. Sarah stood, then turned back to me. David, I know you probably never want to see me again, and I understand that, but please, when you think about us, about what we had, remember that at least some of it was real. After she left, Detective Santos resumed her seat. What do you think? I think she's telling the truth about not knowing the specifics of their plan, but she enabled it through her own naivety and their manipulation. That's our assessment too. Criminally, she's likely innocent. Personally, Detective Santos shrugged. That's for you to decide. She opened her notepad again. Now let's talk about next steps. Frank and Linda Mitchell will be charged with attempted kidnapping, conspiracy, and drug-related offenses. If convicted, they're looking at 10 to 15 years each. And Sarah? No charges unless additional evidence surfaces, but Detective Santos hesitated. There's something else you need to know. This wasn't their first attempt at something like this. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? We ran their names through the system and found some interesting connections. Over the past 2 years, there have been 3 other cases involving wealthy men in Seattle who reported being approached by attractive young women, followed by mysterious incidents, drug drinks, attempted break-ins, financial irregularities. You think Sarah was involved in those too? We don't know yet. The MO is similar, but none of those cases resulted in charges. The victims either didn't want to press charges or couldn't prove anything concrete happened. Detective Santos closed her notepad. We're reaching out to those men now. The rain had intensified outside, turning the windows into rivers of distorted city lights. I felt exhausted, emotionally drained, and more alone than I'd been in years. What happens now? I asked. Now you go home, try to get some sleep, and tomorrow we start building the case against Frank and Linda Mitchell. You'll need to come in next week to give a formal statement and sign some paperwork. And if those other cases are connected, then this gets a lot more complicated. As I prepared to leave, Detective Santos handed me a business card. Mr. Chen, I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've learned that the truth is usually more complex than it first appears. Don't make any major decisions about anything until we have all the facts. The Uber ride back to my apartment took 20 minutes through empty streets slick with rain. Seattle looked different now, the familiar landmarks seeming somehow foreign and threatening. My building's doorman, Marcus, was asleep in his chair when I arrived, and I was grateful not to have to explain why I looked like I'd been through hell. My apartment felt cavernous and cold. The view that usually filled me with pride, the city spread out below, the sound beyond that, my hard-earned success made tangible, now seemed like a target painted on my back. How many other people looked at these windows and saw opportunity rather than achievement? I poured myself a real drink, a scotch from a bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat in my leather chair, facing the windows. The bitter taste from the drugged cognac was finally fading, replaced by the smooth burn of quality whiskey. My phone buzzed with a text message. Sarah, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to say this. I love you. That was real, even if everything else was a lie. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from my family. I'm sorry I was too stupid to see what they were doing. I understand if you hate me now. I stared at the message for a long time, then set the phone aside without responding. Because the truth was, I didn't hate her. What I felt was much more complicated than hate. I felt betrayed, yes, but also protective of her. Used, but also sympathetic to her situation. Angry at her naivety, but also mourning the loss of what I'd thought we had together. The scotch was making me philosophical in the way that expensive alcohol does at 3 a.m. I found myself thinking about trust and how quickly it could be destroyed. About the price of success and the loneliness that came with always wondering if people liked you for yourself or for what you could provide. My laptop was still open on the coffee table from earlier that evening when I'd been nervous about meeting Sarah's parents. A lifetime ago, it seemed. I opened a new browser window and, almost without conscious thought, started searching for the other cases Detective Santos had mentioned. What I found made my blood run cold. The first case from 18 months ago involved a venture capitalist named Robert Hawthorne. He'd met a young woman at an art gallery opening, dated her for several months, then woke up one morning to find his apartment ransacked and $50,000 missing from his personal accounts. The woman had disappeared, and Hawthorne had eventually dropped the charges, claiming he couldn't prove she was involved. The second case was even more disturbing. A tech executive named James Morrison had been found unconscious in his car in a parking garage, apparently drugged. His wallet and phone were missing, along with several expensive watches from his apartment. He claimed his girlfriend of 6 months had been the only other person with access to his home, but she'd vanished without a trace. The third case never went to court. A real estate developer named Michael Zhang had reported suspicious activity around his home and office, but when police investigated, they found no evidence of wrongdoing. Zhang had refused to press charges or provide details, but the police report mentioned his concern about a woman he'd been dating who'd been asking unusual questions about his finances and security procedures. 3 successful men, 3 young women who'd gained their trust over months of careful courtship. 3 attempts at robbery or kidnapping that had either succeeded or been mysteriously dropped. And now, me. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking slightly. The pattern was undeniable, but it raised terrible questions about Sarah's involvement. Had she been the woman in these other cases? Had our entire relationship been nothing more than an elaborate con game? Or was she another victim, used by her family again and again to target wealthy men, kept innocent through careful manipulation and emotional manipulation? Outside my windows, Seattle slept on, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded in one of its finest restaurants. But I knew that sleep wouldn't come for me tonight, because tomorrow would bring more questions, more investigations, and more painful truths about the woman I'd thought I loved. The bitter taste was back in my mouth, but this time it wasn't from drugs. It was the taste of betrayal, deception, and the sickening realization that nothing about my life was as safe or secure as I'd believed. As the first pale hints of dawn crept across the sky, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be another victim who dropped the charges or refused to cooperate. I was going to see this through to the end, no matter how much it hurt or what it revealed about Sarah. Because if she was innocent, she deserved to be cleared. And if she wasn't, If she wasn't, then I was going to make sure she never got the chance to destroy another man's life the way she'd destroyed mine. The morning sun filtered through my apartment windows like an accusation, highlighting the emptiness of coffee cups and the chaos of papers scattered across my kitchen island. It had been 3 days since the incident at Canlis, and I hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a stretch. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's face. Sometimes the loving woman I'd fallen for, sometimes a stranger wearing her features like a mask. Detective Santos had called twice, asking me to come in for follow-up questions. The lab results were in, confirming not just the presence of Rohypnol and Valium in the cognac, but also traces of GHB, a cocktail designed to render me unconscious for hours while leaving minimal memory of what happened afterward. I'd been researching obsessively, diving deep into the cases Detective Santos had mentioned and others I'd found through cross-referencing news reports and court records. The pattern was more extensive than I'd initially realized, stretching back over 3 years and involving at least 7 cases across the Pacific Northwest. My laptop screen showed a timeline I'd constructed, mapping the dates and locations of each incident. March 2022, Portland, Oregon. Victim Thomas Bradley, tech entrepreneur, MO. Met woman at coffee shop, dated 4 months, drugged at upscale restaurant, outcome, $75,000 stolen from accounts, charges dropped August 2022, Vancouver, BC. Victim Alexander Reed, investment banker, MO. Met woman at charity gala, dated 6 months, elaborate family dinner. Outcome, kidnapped for 18 hours, $200,000 ransom paid, no arrests, February 2023, Seattle, Washington. Victim Robert Hawthorne, venture capitalist, MO. Met woman at art gallery, dated 5 months, apartment ransacked. Outcome, $50,000 missing, charges dropped. The list continued, each entry a variation on the same theme. Wealthy, successful men, extended courtship periods, elaborate schemes, involving family members, and always the victims either too embarrassed to prosecute or too scared to see it through. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Can we please talk? I found something you need to see." I'd been ignoring her messages for 3 days, but something in this one made me pause. Against my better judgment, I called her. "David?" Her voice was hoarse, exhausted. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you. I'm not sure we have anything to talk about, Sarah. Please, just listen. I found something in my mum's things, photos, documents, names of other men. David, I think this has been going on much longer than we thought, and I think I've been part of it without knowing." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of documents? I can't explain over the phone. Can you meet me somewhere public? The Pike Place Market? There are always crowds there." Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was a mistake, another layer of manipulation. But the desperation in her voice sounded genuine, and if she had evidence that could help the police build their case— "1 hour, I said, by the fish market. And Sarah, if this is some kind of setup— "It's not, I swear to you, it's not." Pike Place Market was bustling with its usual chaos of tourists, vendors, and locals. The fish throwers were in full swing, hurling salmon through the air while cameras flashed and crowds cheered. I positioned myself where I could see multiple exit routes and watch for Sarah. She arrived exactly on time, carrying a large manila envelope and looking like she hadn't slept any more than I had. Her usually perfect appearance was disheveled, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, minimal makeup, wearing jeans and a University of Washington sweatshirt instead of her typical stylish outfits. "Thank you for coming," she said, settling onto the bench beside me, but maintaining distance between us. "I know you have every reason not to trust me. Show me what you found." Sarah opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photographs. The first few were surveillance photos, similar to what the police had shown me. Men in expensive clothes, clearly wealthy, going about their daily routines. But as she flipped through them, I realized these weren't just random wealthy men. They were all men I'd seen before. "This is Robert Hawthorne," I said, pointing to a photo of a distinguished man in his 50s entering a downtown office building. "You know him?" Not personally, but I recognize him from tech industry events. He's a venture capitalist. I studied the photo more carefully. This was taken outside his office building. How did your family get this? Sarah's hands were trembling as she handed me another set of photos. There are more, dozens of them. And look at this. The next batch showed a younger woman, blonde, attractive, well-dressed, in various locations around the city. Sometimes she was alone, sometimes with older men who looked like they could be her parents. In several photos, she was clearly following or watching the men from the first set of pictures. I don't understand, I said. Who is this woman? That's what I was hoping you could tell me. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. Because according to the dates on these photos, she was doing the same thing to these men that I was supposedly doing to you. At the same time, I was dating you. The implications hit me like a physical blow. You think your parents have been running this scam with multiple women? I think they've been running it for years, with different women targeting different men simultaneously. Sarah pulled out a notebook, her mother's handwriting, pages of detailed notes about various men's schedules, preferences, financial information. Look at the dates, David. While I was falling in love with you, they were running identical operations on at least 3 other men. I flipped through the notebook, my horror growing with each page. Linda Mitchell had documented everything with the precision of a military operation. Bank account information, security codes, daily routines, even personal details about family members and emotional vulnerabilities. How did you find all this? After the arrest, Frank made bail. Mom didn't. While she's in jail, I went to their house to collect some of her things, and I found all this hidden in her bedroom closet. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. David, I think my mom has been doing this since she married Frank, maybe even before. A new photograph caught my attention. This one showing the blonde woman with a man I didn't recognize, but the background was familiar. They were standing outside Canlis restaurant. When was this taken? I asked. Sarah checked the date stamp. 6 months ago, right around the time you and I started getting serious. The timeline was becoming clearer and more disturbing. While Sarah and I were developing our relationship, her mother was running a parallel operation with this other woman and different targets, which meant, Sarah, I need you to think carefully. Did your mother ever ask you to change our date locations, suggest specific restaurants or activities? She nodded slowly. All the time. She said she was helping me plan romantic evenings, giving me ideas for places that would impress you. And did she ever ask you to cancel dates at the last minute? Reschedule things? Yes, but Sarah's eyes widened as understanding dawned. She said it was to keep you interested, that being too available would make me seem desperate. I felt sick. She was coordinating multiple operations, making sure you and this other woman didn't accidentally cross paths with each other's targets. Sarah buried her face in her hands. Oh, God. How many people have they hurt? How many men like you have they destroyed? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Detective Santos. Mr. Chen, we need you to come to the station immediately. We've made some significant discoveries about the Mitchell case, and we need to discuss them with you in person. I'm actually with Sarah Mitchell right now. She's found some evidence you'll want to see. A pause. Bring her with you. But Mr. Chen, be very careful. We've learned some things that change the nature of this investigation considerably. The ride to the police station was silent. Both Sarah and I lost in our own thoughts. I kept studying the photographs she'd found, trying to piece together the scope of what we were dealing with. This wasn't just a family in financial trouble making a desperate decision. This was a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. Detective Santos met us in the lobby, her expression grim. Follow me, both of you. She led us to a conference room where another detective was waiting, a tall man with graying hair and tired eyes. Charts and photographs covered the walls, connected by red string like something out of a crime drama. This is Detective Morrison from the Oregon State Police, Santos said. He's been investigating similar cases throughout the Pacific Northwest. Detective Morrison gestured to the wall displays. What happened to you, mister? Chen is part of what we believe to be the largest romance fraud operation in the region's history. We're looking at least 12 confirmed cases over the past 4 years, with estimated damages exceeding $2 million. Sarah gasped, staring at the wall. Several of the photos she'd found in her mother's closet were pinned up there, along with many others I hadn't seen. The Mitchell family, Linda, Frank, and at least 4 other women we've identified, have been systematically targeting wealthy men across Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia, Morrison continued. The operation is sophisticated, with careful victim selection, months of relationship building, and elaborate schemes designed to maximize financial gain while minimizing legal exposure. 4 other women? I asked. Santos pointed to a section of the wall. We've identified them through various pieces of evidence. The blonde woman in your photos is Jessica Reynolds. She's been arrested in Portland for a similar scheme. There's also Maria Santos, no relation to me, who's been working the Vancouver market, and twins named Kelly and Kristen Park who've been operating out of Spokane. Sarah was staring at the wall in horror. I don't understand. If they had all these other women, why did they need me? Morrison and Santos exchanged a look. Sarah, Santos said gently, we don't think you were just an unwitting accomplice. We think you were their most successful operator. The color drained from Sarah's face. That's not true. I didn't know anything about this. The evidence suggests otherwise, Morrison said, pulling out a thick file. We've been in contact with 7 men who reported being victimized by a woman matching your description over the past 3 years. In each case, the woman identified herself by different names, but the physical description and methodology were consistent. He opened the file and spread out driver's license photos, different names, but all clearly Sarah's face. Jennifer Martin, Lisa Thompson, Amanda Foster, Catherine Wright. Morrison looked directly at Sarah. Should I continue? Sarah was shaking her head frantically. No, this is impossible. I've only been dating David. I haven't been with anyone else for 8 months. What about before David? Santos asked quietly. The silence stretched between us. Sarah's face cycled through confusion, denial, and slowly dawning horror. There was, before David, I dated other men, but those were real relationships. I wasn't scamming anyone. Tell us about Marcus Thompson, Morrison said, consulting his notes. Investment banker from Portland. You dated him for 4 months in early 2023. Marcus we met at a coffee shop. We dated for a while, but it didn't work out. According to Mr. Thompson, you drugged him at a restaurant and he woke up in his car with $50,000 missing from his accounts. That's not true. Sarah's voice was desperate now. Marcus and I had some drinks with dinner and he got sick. I called him an Uber and made sure he got home safely. I never took any money from him. Morrison pulled out another file. What about James Rodriguez, tech executive from Vancouver? I watched Sarah's face carefully as Morrison continued listing names and details. Her shock and confusion seemed genuine, but the evidence was overwhelming. Either she was an incredible actress or something much more complex was happening here. Detective Morrison, I interrupted, is it possible that Sarah was being manipulated by her family without her knowledge? Maybe they were drugging these men during dates and making her believe they were just getting sick. Santos and Morrison exchanged another look. That's actually a possibility we've been considering, Santos admitted. Some of the victims reported memory gaps that extended beyond the drugging incident, and the timing of several events suggests coordination that would have been difficult for Sarah to manage alone. Sarah looked up at me with desperate gratitude. That's exactly what happened. I remember Marcus getting sick at dinner, but I thought he just had too much to drink, and James, he had what I thought was food poisoning during our last date. I felt so bad for him. But Sarah, Morrison said gently, how do you explain the fake IDs, the multiple identities? Sarah's face went blank. I don't know what you're talking about. Morrison showed her the driver's licenses again. These are all professionally made fake IDs with your photo and different names. They were found in your apartment during the search warrant execution this morning. You search my apartment. Standard procedure after an arrest like your parents. Sarah, these IDs were hidden in your closet along with wigs, colored contacts, and other materials used to alter your appearance. Sarah was staring at the IDs like they were alien artifacts. I've never seen these before in my life. Someone must have put them there. Who has access to your apartment? Santos asked. Just me and my parents. I gave them a spare key in case of emergencies. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was even more disturbing than I'd imagined. If Sarah was telling the truth, then her own family had not only used her as an unwitting accomplice, but had been conducting operations in her name, setting her up to take the fall if their schemes were ever discovered. There's something else, Morrison said, consulting his notes. We've been analyzing the timeline of these incidents, and we found something interesting. Sarah, do you remember being unusually tired or having memory gaps after certain social events over the past few years? Sarah nodded slowly. Sometimes. Mum said it was probably stress from school and work. She sometimes made me special teas to help me relax. Santos and Morrison exchanged another significant look. Sarah, Santos said carefully, we're going to need to run some blood tests. We think your mother may have been drugging you too. The implications hit me like a tsunami. If Linda Mitchell had been drugging her own daughter, then she could have been using Sarah as an unknowing accomplice while conducting operations in her name. Sarah could have been present during the crimes without being consciously aware of what was happening. You think they were using me as a puppet? Sarah whispered. It's a possibility we need to investigate, Morrison confirmed. If you were being drugged with substances that caused memory loss and increased suggestibility, your mother could have been directing your actions without your knowledge. Sarah began crying again, but this time there was relief mixed with the horror. I knew something was wrong. I knew I couldn't have hurt all those people, but the evidence was planted, I said, understanding flooding over me. Your mother created false identities in your name, planted evidence in your apartment, and used drugs to control your behavior during the actual crimes. If anyone investigated, all the evidence would point to you. While she maintained plausible deniability as the concerned mother, Santos added, it's actually brilliant, in a completely sociopathic way. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. If you want to see your girlfriend again, meet us at the address I'm sending. Come alone, and don't involve the police. I showed the message to the detectives, my blood running cold. Who has your phone number, Sarah? But when I looked up, Sarah's chair was empty. She was gone. The conference room erupted into chaos as Morrison rushed to the door and Santos grabbed her radio. Through the window I could see Sarah in the hallway, walking calmly toward the exit with a blank expression on her face. She's been activated, Morrison said grimly. Whatever they gave her, it's still in her system, and someone just triggered it. As we watched helplessly, Sarah walked out of the police station and climbed into a waiting car. The last thing I saw before it disappeared into traffic was Linda Mitchell in the passenger seat, smiling coldly at the building she'd just reclaimed her daughter from. The bitter taste was back in my mouth, stronger than ever, because I was beginning to understand that everything I thought I knew about this case was wrong. Sarah wasn't just a victim or an accomplice. She was a weapon. The address led to an abandoned warehouse in South Seattle, in the industrial district near the Duwamish River. The November rain had turned to sleet, coating everything in a treacherous glaze that reflected the streetlights like broken glass. It was the kind of neighborhood where legitimate businesses closed at 5, and the only people out after dark had business that wouldn't look good in daylight. I sat in my Tesla in the empty parking lot, the engine running, and the heater fighting against the cold, seeping through the windows. Detective Santos's voice crackled through my earpiece, a nearly invisible wire that the police tech team had fitted me with before I'd driven here against all their advice. Are you sure about this, Mr. Chen? Her voice was tense. We can't guarantee your safety once you go inside. I'm sure, I replied, though I wasn't sure of anything anymore. The past 6 hours had been a blur of revelations and preparations. After Sarah had walked out of the police station in that drugged, zombie-like state, the investigation had kicked into high gear. The blood tests on Sarah's clothes and personal items had revealed traces of a sophisticated cocktail of drugs, not just sedatives, but compounds that could induce a state of heightened suggestibility while suppressing memory formation. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the forensic psychiatrist consulting on the case, had explained it in terms that chilled me to the bone. "What we're looking at is essentially chemical mind control," she'd said during the emergency briefing. "With the right combination of drugs and psychological conditioning, a person can be made to perform complex actions while having little to no memory of doing so afterward." The fake IDs, the wigs, the evidence planted in Sarah's apartment, it was all part of an insurance policy. If any of their schemes went wrong, Linda Mitchell could activate her drugged daughter, have her perform the necessary actions to cover their tracks or eliminate witnesses, then let Sarah face the consequences with no memory of what she'd done. "It's the perfect crime," Detective Morrison had said grimly. "The perpetrator has a completely innocent alter ego who genuinely believes in their own innocence because, in a very real sense, they are innocent." But now that innocent alter ego was back under her mother's control, and Linda Mitchell had made it clear what she wanted. Me. I checked my phone one more time. The message had been updated with additional instructions. "Come to the main entrance alone. Any sign of police and the girl dies, you have 10 minutes. Through the warehouse's grimy windows, I could see dim lights flickering in what appeared to be an office area on the second floor. Movement shadows suggested at least 3 people inside, though I couldn't make out details. "Teams are in position," Santos's voice informed me. "SWAT is covering the back entrance and the loading dock. Detective Morrison is in the building across the street with a sniper rifle. But David, once you go inside, we won't be able to help you immediately." "I understand. Remember, your job is to keep them talking and try to get Sarah away from whatever drugs they're using to control her. The psychiatrist thinks that if she can stay conscious and unmedicated for more than an hour, she might start to break free of their conditioning." I stepped out of the car into the sleet, immediately feeling the cold bite through my jacket. The warehouse loomed above me like a concrete monument to industrial decay, its broken windows and rusted fire escapes speaking of better days long past. The main entrance was a heavy steel door painted industrial green, though rust and weather had turned it more brown than anything else. I tried the handle, unlocked. It opened with a groan that echoed through the empty space beyond. The interior was cavernous and mostly dark, filled with the shadows of abandoned machinery and stacks of rotting pallets. My footsteps echoed off the concrete floor as I made my way toward a staircase at the far end that led up to the office area where I'd seen the lights. "David Chen," Linda Mitchell's voice drifted down from above. "Right on time. Come up, but move slowly. We wouldn't want any accidents." The staircase was metal and industrial, probably installed when this place was a functioning warehouse decades ago. Each step rang out like a bell, announcing my progress to anyone listening. At the top, I found myself facing a doorway lit by harsh fluorescent lights. The office area had been converted into something that looked like a cross between a safe house and a medical facility. Computer equipment lined one wall, showing what appeared to be surveillance feeds from various locations around the city. Medical equipment, IV stands, monitors, cabinets full of pharmaceutical supplies occupied another corner. And in the center of it all, Sarah sat in a chair that looked disturbingly like something from a psychiatrist's office, leather restraints around her wrists and ankles. Her eyes were open but vacant, staring straight ahead with the glassy look of someone heavily sedated. Linda Mitchell stood behind her daughter, one hand resting possessively on Sarah's shoulder. She'd traded her elegant restaurant attire for practical black clothing and rubber gloves. Frank wasn't visible, but I could hear movement in the shadows beyond the main lights. "Welcome to our little operation, David," Linda said, her voice carrying none of the warmth it had held during our dinner at Canlis. I have to admit you've caused us quite a bit of trouble. Let her go, I said, nodding towards Sarah. Your fight is with me. Oh, but that's where you're wrong. Sarah is the key to everything we do. She's been our most valuable asset for 3 years now. Linda's hand moved to stroke Sarah's hair with disturbing tenderness. Haven't you, sweetheart? Sarah didn't respond, but I saw her eyelids flutter slightly. The police know everything, I said. They know about the drugs, the fake identities, all of it. This is over, Linda. The police know what we've allowed them to know. And when they find your body and Sarah's confession video explaining how she killed you in a fit of guilty conscience before taking her own life, they'll have a nice, neat conclusion to their investigation. Frank stepped out of the shadows then, carrying what looked like a video camera on a tripod. His face was grim, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. Linda, maybe we should reconsider, he started. Shut up, Frank. We've come too far to back out now. Linda's voice was sharp with authority. Set up the camera. We need to get this done before the drugs wear off. I realized then that Linda Mitchell wasn't just the mastermind of this operation. She was completely insane. The rational criminal who'd planned elaborate cons for years had snapped under the pressure of being caught, and now she was operating on pure desperation and rage. You want to know how this all started, David? Linda continued, seemingly oblivious to the fact that her plan was falling apart around her. It started with Sarah's biological father, rich lawyer, promised me the world, then left us with nothing when he died. His life insurance went to his first wife. His assets were tied up in legal battles for years, and I was left raising his daughter on food stamps and welfare. Sarah's eyes were starting to focus slightly, and I saw her looking around the room with growing confusion. So I learned to take what I needed from men like him, men like you, rich, successful, arrogant men who think they can buy anything, including love. Linda's voice was rising, taking on the tone of someone delivering a rehearsed speech. The drugs made it so easy. A little something in a drink, and suddenly these powerful men were as helpless as children. Oh, but why Sarah? I asked, trying to keep Linda talking while hoping that my earpiece was still working and the police were hearing all of this. Why involve your own daughter? Because she was perfect for it, beautiful, intelligent, trusting, and with the right pharmaceutical encouragement, completely controllable. Linda pulled a syringe from her pocket. The compounds I've been giving her don't just suppress memory, they make her extraordinarily susceptible to suggestion. I could tell her. She was Cleopatra, and she'd believe it completely. I saw Sarah's head turn slightly at the sound of her mother's voice, and for just a moment, her eyes met mine. There was recognition there, and horror, as if she was beginning to remember fragments of what had been done to her. The beautiful part is that she genuinely believes she's innocent, Linda continued, advancing toward her daughter with the syringe. Because in her conscious mind, she is innocent. All the memories of what she's actually done are locked away where she can't access them. Mom! Sarah's voice was weak and slurred, but it was her own voice, not the blank monotone she'd had when she left the police station. What's happening? David, why are you here? It's okay, Sarah, I said, taking a step closer. You're going to be okay. But Linda was faster. She grabbed Sarah's arm and positioned the syringe. Time for your medicine, sweetheart. This will help you remember what you need to do. That's when Frank finally found his backbone. No, he said firmly, stepping between Linda and Sarah. I can't let you do this to her anymore. Get out of my way, Frank. She's just a kid, Linda. She's your daughter. This has gone too far. The argument that followed happened in slow motion. Linda, desperate and unhinged, tried to push past Frank to get to Sarah. Frank, finally standing up to the woman who'd been controlling him for years, refused to move. The syringe fell to the floor and shattered, its contents spreading across the concrete. And in that moment of chaos, Sarah's restraints, apparently not as secure as Linda had thought, gave way. She stood unsteadily, the drugs still affecting her coordination, but her eyes were clear and focused for the first time since I'd arrived. You drugged me, she said, her voice growing stronger. All those times I couldn't remember things. All those men who said I hurt them. That was you controlling me. Sarah, honey, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Sarah's voice was deadly calm now. You turned me into a weapon and used me to destroy innocent people. You made me into a monster and then convinced me I was the victim. Linda lunged for another syringe from the medical cabinet, but Sarah was faster. Years of being drugged and manipulated had apparently given her insight into her mother's methods, because she knocked the cabinet over, sending medical supplies scattering across the floor. That's when the warehouse erupted into chaos. The SWAT team came through the windows in a shower of glass and rappelling ropes. Detective Santos and her team stormed up the staircase I'd used. Detective Morrison's voice boomed through a megaphone from outside, ordering everyone to get on the ground. In the confusion, Frank raised his hands and stepped away from the women, clearly surrendering. Linda made one last desperate grab for a weapon, a scalpel from the scattered medical supplies, but Sarah was ready for her. The fight between mother and daughter was brief but vicious. Linda, driven by desperation and years of controlling others through chemicals and manipulation, underestimated the strength of a young woman who had finally realized the full scope of what had been done to her. Sarah disarmed her mother and held her down until the police could take her into custody. As the dust settled and Linda Mitchell was led away in handcuffs, screaming about how ungrateful her daughter was, I found myself sitting on a crate next to Sarah. She was shaking from the cold, the drugs wearing off, and the emotional trauma of discovering that her entire life had been a lie. "David," she said, her voice barely audible over the activity around us. "I don't know how many people I've hurt. I don't know what I've done while I was under her control. That wasn't you," I said firmly. "What your mother did to you, that wasn't your fault. But I still did those things. Even if I don't remember them, even if I was drugged, those men were still hurt because of me." Detective Santos approached us, her expression sympathetic. "Sarah, you need to know that preliminary tests show you've been systematically drugged for at least 3 years. The compounds in your system would have made it impossible for you to form normal memories or resist suggestions. Legally and morally, you're a victim here, not a perpetrator." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we sort through the evidence, identify all the victims, and start the process of healing," Santos replied. "Your mother and Frank will face charges for kidnapping, drugging, fraud, and a dozen other crimes. You'll need extensive therapy to recover from what they did to you, but you'll recover as a free person." Later, as we sat in the police station giving our final statements, Sarah turned to me with a question I'd been dreading. "Do you think you can ever forgive me? I know I wasn't in control, but I was still the person who gathered information about you, who helped set you up." I thought about it carefully. The Sarah I'd fallen in love with had been real, even if she'd been manipulated into helping her family. The woman sitting beside me now, free of drugs and finally understanding the truth about her life, was someone I could see myself caring about again. But trust, once shattered, takes time to rebuild. "I think," I said carefully, "that we both need time to figure out who we really are when we're not being manipulated or lied to. Maybe someday we can find out if what we had was real." Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'd like that. But David, even if we never get back together, even if you decide you can never trust me again, thank you for saving me, for seeing that I was a victim too, even when all the evidence said I was guilty." 6 months later, I was back at Pike Place Market, but this time I wasn't meeting Sarah in crisis. She'd completed intensive therapy to recover from years of chemical manipulation and psychological abuse, and I'd been working with my own counselor to process the trauma of betrayal and the complex feelings that came with learning someone you loved had been controlled like a puppet. We met for coffee, just coffee, nothing more, and talked about our lives. Sarah was working with a non-profit that helped victims of human trafficking and manipulation. I'd started a foundation that provided resources for people who'd been victimized by romance fraud. "Any word on the other victims?" Sarah asked, stirring her latte. Detective Santos says they've identified 12 men who were targeted by your mother's operation. Most of them are getting their money back through asset forfeiture, and several have said they want to contribute to the foundation. And the other women? The ones who worked with my mother? Jessica Reynolds pled guilty and is cooperating with prosecutors. The Park twins are fighting extradition from Canada. Maria Santos disappeared. They think she fled to Mexico. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching tourists browse the market stalls and vendors call out their daily specials. "David," Sarah said finally, "I want you to know that I remember everything now. The therapy helped me recover the suppressed memories, and I remember every single thing I did while I was drugged. I remember gathering information about you. I remember being coached on what questions to ask. But I also remember falling in love with you, and that was real. That was the one thing my mother couldn't fake or control." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since that night at Canlis. The woman across from me was different from the one I'd fallen in love with. Stronger, more self-aware, marked by trauma, but not broken by it. "I know," I said. "I can see it in your eyes. The love was real, even when everything else was manipulation." So where does that leave us? I thought about it, tasting the rich coffee and watching the familiar chaos of the market swirl around us. The bitter taste that had haunted me for months was finally gone, replaced by something more complex, but also more honest. "I think it leaves us with a chance," I said finally. "Not to go back to what we had, that was built on lies, even if the feelings were real, but to build something new, something based on complete honesty about who we really are." Sarah smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her since this all began. "I'd like that, but can we take it slow? I'm still learning how to be myself without chemical interference, and I imagine you're still learning how to trust again." Slow sounds perfect. As we left the market together, walking side by side but not touching, I realized that the story of my drug drink at Canlis hadn't ended with arrests and convictions. It had ended with something much more valuable: the possibility of redemption, the strength that comes from surviving manipulation and betrayal, and the knowledge that real love, messy, complicated, and built on truth, was worth fighting for. The bitter taste was gone, but it had left behind something sweeter: the recognition that sometimes the most important relationships are the ones we choose to rebuild rather than the ones that come easy. 6 months after that, Sarah and I were engaged, not because we'd forgotten what happened, but because we'd learned to trust each other in the aftermath of betrayal. Our wedding was small, held on a sunny Seattle afternoon with Detective Santos as one of our witnesses and Dr. Warren, the psychiatrist who'd helped Sarah recover her memories, officiating. Linda Mitchell was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Frank got 10 years and was eligible for parole in 5. The foundation I'd started had helped over 100 victims of romance fraud, and Sarah's nonprofit had grown into a nationally recognized resource for survivors of psychological manipulation. Sometimes, late at night in our shared apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, Sarah would wake up from nightmares about the things she'd been made to do. And sometimes I would wake up in a cold sweat, tasting that bitter cognac and reliving the moment when I realized the person I loved had been used as a weapon against me. But we'd learned to comfort each other through those dark moments. And more importantly, we'd learned that healing was possible, not just from what others had done to us, but from what we'd done to each other while under their control. The bitter taste was gone for good now, replaced by the sweet knowledge that sometimes the most profound love grows not despite betrayal, but through the hard work of rebuilding trust, one honest moment at a time. And every time we passed Canlis Restaurant, Sarah and I would smile at each other and remember the night when a bitter taste and a quick decision changed both our lives forever, not just by saving me from her family's scheme, but by setting us both free from the web of lies and manipulation that had trapped us both. In the end, that's what real love is. Not the perfect romance built on pretty lies, but the difficult, honest relationship built on ugly truths and the choice to trust again anyway. The bitter taste had led to the sweetest ending I could have imagined.